Since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, Russia's territorial ambitions have been under the spotlight. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, the Kremlin has been making moves all over Europe. This power politics was born in 1991. At that time, 15 Soviet republics declared their independence amid the collapse of the USSR. But within the KGB, the USSR Secret Service, agents refused to accept this loss of influence. Instead, they set up a strategy to prevent these states from leaving the Russian orbit and joining the European Union. Their plan? To infiltrate the ethnic or Russian-speaking minorities in these new countries, stir up claims on their identity, and help them break away. It happened in Moldova in 1992, Georgia in 2008, and Ukraine in 2014. The same method was used every time. With the support of the Russian army, separatists create self-proclaimed republics that are not recognized by the international community. They bear mysterious names, such as the Donetsk People's Republic, the Moldovan Republic of Dniester, or the Autonomous Republic of Abkhazia. To find out what lies behind these phantom states, we set out for the other side of the Iron Curtain. In Transnistria, as well as in Abkhazia, many inhabitants live in nostalgia for the USSR. A journey through the Soviet glacis, the puppet countries that serve Russia's interests and destabilize Europe. Our investigation into the pro-Russian separatist regions begins in Moldova. In 1991, this former Soviet republic gained independence, but in 1992, civil war broke out in the east of the country. It pitted the Moldovan army against a Russian-speaking separatist movement, entirely created by the KGB and supported by the Russian army. After 4 months of fighting, a ceasefire was signed. The separatists won autonomy for Transnistria. 30 years later, 1,500 Russian soldiers are still deployed there. Since Transnistria is off-limits to journalists, we pass ourselves off as tourists. The border post is guarded by Russian FSB agents. 10 minutes later, we arrive in Tiraspol, the capital. Stalinist architecture, busts of Lenin, a monument celebrating the Red Army's victory over the Nazis. Soviet decorum is omnipresent, and one feels very close to Russia here.
It's Suvorov. He was the one who created the town.
Yulia is 31. She grew up here. The young woman studied languages.
I'm working remotely as a personal assistant with a Swiss company. Also, another part-time job. We just help companies to be on the first, on the top, on the list in searching engine.
Like many young people here, Yulia has to reconcile her Russian-speaking culture with her desire for freedom and adventure. She lives with her brother, who owns an apartment in the suburbs of Tiraspol.
Да. Ну вообще я подумала о том, чтобы устроиться куда-то на работу в Кишиневе. Что-то я соскучилась за коллективом.
It's Friday, and like in most countries, Yulia is getting ready to go out with friends.
I'm preparing for a party. It's the party on the boat. It's kind of popular here. Music and nice view. Basically, I don't really put a lot of makeup, just lipstick, some, cheeks. That's it. And of course, dress.
Yulia goes out to buy a few bottles. She goes to Kvint, the largest manufacturer and distributor of liquor. Kvint produces 20 million bottles a year, a disproportionate figure for this territory of barely 500,000 inhabitants.
У нас сегодня будет вечеринка вечером, и нужны вкусняшки. Нужен алкоголь для девочек и для мальчиков. Давайте 5 бутылочек Нистру. Где-то также 5 бутылок шампанского, да?
Kvint alone accounts for 5% of Transnistria's GDP, exporting to 28 countries worldwide.
Champagne for girls and cognac for guys. Cognac. Tastes good. Cognac with cola.
For 10 bottles, Yulia pays 800 Transnistrian rubles, about 50 euros. The Transnistrian ruble is the enclave's official currency.
Plastic or?
Yeah, it's plastic. Plastic money.
This currency has no value at all outside Transnistria's borders.
Спасибо большое.
This money will go straight into the coffers of Sheriff, a powerful conglomerate that controls 40% of the enclave's economy. In addition to a monopoly on alcohol production, Sheriff owns a caviar factory, supermarkets, banks and gas stations. The company also owns Transnistria's only private TV station and a soccer club, FC Sheriff Tiraspol. Viktor Gushan, a 59-year-old oligarch, is the face, at the head of this holding company. He's a man of the shadows. This photo is one of a few images released to the public. A former KGB agent, he is seen here on a separatist armoured vehicle, lending them a hand in 1992. Since then, he has become the Kremlin's right-hand man, the one Moscow relies on to keep Transnistria under control. On the banks of the Dniester River, Yulia meets up with her friends. For 25 Transnistrian rubles, or €1.80 per person, they can treat themselves to an hour's boat ride.
Девочки, берите все стаканчики, сейчас будем наливать. Открой шампанское и разливай всем девочкам, пожалуйста.
Yulia's friends are between 24 and 34 years old, working as tourist guides, agronomists, pharmacists, designers and saleswomen. They often have a series of small jobs.
Скажи, пожалуйста, что работа такая, что не особо в танце. Привлекать к танцам или как-то что-то так. Только не говори, что я работаю заправщиком, конечно.
25-year-old Andrei is an electrical engineer. As he can't find a job in his field, he works as a gas station attendant, earning €350 a month.
Фирму Шериф. Шериф – это, если вы знаете, что это такое, это есть футбольная команда Шериф. Это все в целом одна и та же команда.
Sheriff offers slightly above average salaries, but for Andrei that's barely enough.
Если жить красиво, скажи, чтобы жить красиво, хотя бы минимум 500. Минимум 500 евро.
So Andrei,
Скажи, что в Приднестровье, слышь, Юля, переведи, что в Приднестровье очень мало.
Vadim, 32, is a former professional dancer. Since the invasion of Transnistria's neighbour, Ukraine, he's worried about the future.
I won't speak about the politics things, but it's not quiet here right now, so we're afraid about World War III. A little bit stressful, so we are ready all the time.
what does it mean to be ready?
Ready to move.
So it
To
means
move.
that you have one bag with
Leave everything.
Every year, 1/3 of 18 to 29-year-olds leave the separatist republic to study or work abroad. Since its creation 30 years ago, Transnistria has lost 40% of its population, but here it's fashionable to say you love your country.
Я люблю свою страну. Я люблю свою страну. One love. Transnistria, one love.
In this pro-Russian enclave, it is unthinkable to question Transnistria's autonomy, let alone to criticize the government. Behind this sanitized decor lies an authoritarian state. No free press, no opposition, and a president elected with 87% of the vote. In the Supreme Soviet, half of the 33 deputies hold high-level positions with sheriff. The famous enterprise headed by former KGB officer Viktor Gushan. Tiraspol, the capital, is home to most of the enclave's industrial plants. It's a fairly wealthy modern city. The same cannot be said of the countryside, which is in poverty. These areas have gradually emptied out since the fall of the USSR, and people live mainly off agriculture.
We're going to my parents' place. I'm very close with my parents, so it's just small farm for my parents, so we could eat healthy food. It's nice to come back sometime.
Yulia's village is 10 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Krasnesko has 1,800 inhabitants, 1,000 less than 10 years ago. Twice a month, Yulia comes to visit her parents. This is where she grew up, surrounded by farm animals. Her parents live off a plot of land and a few animals.
It looks like they are hungry, but they have food here. These old goats, they're growing so fast. Yeah. It's just my friends, you know, it's a part of our family now.
2 goats and 2 cows are their only means of subsistence.
Скільки молока?
Деякі від коров. У нас 2, одну ще одна має мати, он де там. Тільки для нас, для сім'ї. Он там
Just for our family.
Edik, her father, has been unemployed since 2016. For him, the good old days go back to the USSR, when there was work for everyone, from the age of 12.
возили на машинах, на грузових машинах возили на роботу, співали люди, весело було. А зараз он тишина.
There were 2 factories nearby. One was a poultry packing plant, and the other an armaments factory. Most importantly, there was a kolkhoz, which employed 2,000 people. A kolkhoz is a kind of state agricultural cooperative. They were created from 1928 throughout the entire USSR, following the collectivization of land. The one in Krasnesko covered 3,200 hectares.
Склади.
Edik and his wife were employed here as construction workers.
Удобрення було все там. А тут смінник. Тут відборну пшеницю, кукурузу, все протравлювали тут і потім вже по полям сіяли.
Edik started working here when he was 17. He was paid with grain from the harvest and 180 Soviet rubles a month. When the kolkhoz closed in 1991, a whole way of life disappeared.
Друзей було, да, в колхозі?
Всі були практично друзі між собою. Ностальгія, звісно, є. У всіх. Жили хорошо. За нас думало государство. А зараз за нас ніхто не думає. Самі.
Edik isn't the only one in his village who's nostalgic for the Soviet era. Every year on the 25th of March, the villagers gather to commemorate the liberation of Krasnesko in 1944 by Stalin's troops.
Семейного благополучия, крепкого здоровья, а нашему родному селу, нашему родному Приднестровью.
The teenagers perform Soviet dances to the crowd of villagers gathered in the village square. For the occasion, the boys are dressed in Red Army uniforms.
Нести государственный флаг Приднестровской Молдавской Республики и знамя Союза Советских Социалистических Республик.
The trauma of the Nazi occupation between 1941 and 1944 is still very much alive in Transnistria. Nikolai, a former Red Army lieutenant colonel, reminds the villagers of the horrors of the early days of the occupation. Yet he has no memory of them. He was just 1 year old in 1941.
Если не большинство. Как началась война, здесь сразу нам прибыли немцы. Они искали коммунистов или тем, кто сочувствовал советской власти. И без разбору хватали, бросали, расстреливали и уходили дальше.
At the end of the ceremony, Nikolai and Yulia take a short detour to the village's only convenience store.
Больше ведра не пью, но надпиваю заметно.
He makes a point of toasting and offering her a glass of cognac, from Kvint, of course.
Замерзла, говорит, не хочу. Такая большая не хочет.
After a few drinks, Nikolai is quickly caught up in his obsessions. He can't resist giving Yulia a little lecture in geopolitics, at least his version of the story.
Советский Союз больше всех на свете. Это вы затронули тему, которая решила судьбу не только российского народа, а всего мира. Пока был Советский Союз, было тихо и спокойно. Во всем мире. Разве в советское время были такие войны, локальные или прочие? Не было. Почему? Потому что Советский Союз удерживал всех, кто хотел воевать. А сейчас дали волю американцам. Пока Америка будет бороться за свое главенство на земном шаре, война не кончится.
In Nikolai's black and white worldview, Russia is the great peacemaker and the United States is the devil, responsible for all conflicts.
Спасибо тебе.
Вам спасибо.
Сколько у тебя детей? Будут, не переживай.
Будут, согласны.
Счастливый человек.
Это моя дочка.
Откуда ты знаешь?
Потому що він носи.
ДНК. А от носи, да, ДНК.
ДНК я зробив. Давно.
Все, давай.
Давай, удачі.
The love of the Transnistrian population for Russia is not just explained by the military protection it offers, but also by its unwavering economic support of the enclave. Every year, Moscow supplies 500 million euros worth of gas to the separatist republic. This gas is used to produce electricity in Transnistria, which is then sold to Moldova. Moldova is thus entirely dependent on Transnistria for energy. And every time Moldova makes a move towards the European Union, Russia shuts down the pipeline.
Спасибо, папа. Спасибо большое.
In Yulia's family, they're very grateful to the Russian big brother.
За що Росії живемо, якщо б не Росія, вже давно румени. Світ, газ, бензин, солярка, енергоресурси у нас намного дешевше.
Convinced by Russian propaganda that their neighbors want to invade the area, Edik and his wife have only one wish: to rejoin the Russian Federation.
Війти в состав Росії. Люди хочуть, давно просяться в состав Росії, щоб Росія забрала, щоб на нас не дивились ні румени, ніхто, щоб нас ніхто тут не захватив. А якщо вони хочуть прийти з нагайками сюди, нас тут уніштожати, як що бендеровці, що ці румени, нам цього не треба. Ми просто хочемо жити і все. Хочемо сидіти за столом з вами, говорити.
Главное мирно.
Мир,
Чтобы
чтобы
везде был мир, потому что война это очень страшно.
Будьте здорові.
Vladimir Putin's political ambition is to bring the populations of neighboring countries into the Russian fold. And Moldova is not the only country to bear the brunt of this strategy of regional destabilization. For the past 15 years, Russia has occupied 1/5 of the territory of another former Soviet republic, Georgia. In this small Caucasus country, tensions rose in the summer of 2008. They pitted separatists from two pro-Russian regions, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, against the Georgian army. Moscow sent its tanks to support the separatists, who were supported by the FSB. After 5 days of blitzkrieg, a ceasefire was signed. Russia recognized the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia and set up military bases there. Today, this new border between Abkhazia and Georgia is a zone of tension, which is closely guarded.
Zulu base, this is Echo 1 with message over.
Zita is a policewoman. She works for the European Union.
Echo 1 still mobile to Golf 12, Golf 12 over.
Zita and her colleagues have a mission: to ensure that the autonomous republic, protected by Moscow, is not preparing any hostile action.
As a monitor, I'm here to patrolling along the ABL, observing the area, discovering new borderization equipment.
Abkhazia is just across the river. Barbed wire watchtowers. The dividing line is protected by agents of the FSB, the Russian security services. So as she approaches, Zita is always on her guard.
Rules is all the time to park the cars facing not to the ABL. If something happens, you just can go. You don't need to U-turn.
And what could happen?
I knew it. I was like, why did I mention it? Never know. But you have to be prepared for everything. So now we're gonna check that.
Okay.
Over there, there is the fence, but we never cross that river.
If we cross the river, we might be detained by the Russian border guards over there. Because they see us, if they see us and we are crossing, they will come at us.
So I will just observe now, checking if they made any changes.
All right.
Along with her colleagues, Zita checks if the Russians are stealing territory. At the top of the watchtower, the camera movements indicate that FSB agents are watching us.
They don't really want us to film them or to take a picture of them. So it's very rare to see them.
So, and now on the left side we can see that OP operation post. And when we have a closer look to it, we will see that's the dummy inside. So that's what Russians normally do. They put some dummy inside just to pretend that someone is inside and watching us or looking at us.
These decoys are used to intimidate opponents and civilians trying to cross the border illegally. Behind this new Iron Curtain lies one of the Caucasus' best-kept secrets, a green region with a pleasant climate, ideally situated on the shores of the Black Sea. Every year, Abkhazia attracts 1.5 million visitors. But they are only Russians. They are the only foreigners allowed to visit the enclave.
Ой, вообще клево. Я не знаю, мне кажется, нам ничего настроение не испортит.
Dmitry and Anastasia are 27 and 24. They live in Moscow and both work in the IT security sector.
Ну, хотелось бы подольше здесь задержаться. Жаль, отпуск не бесконечный.
Или переехать сюда работать на удаленку.
А я не знаю, сейчас можно так переехать на удаленку сюда. Ну, как с интернетом.
The couple decided to treat themselves to a few days' vacation in Gagra, Abkhazia's famous Riviera. Already in Soviet times, this was a favorite destination of communist leaders and workers looking to recharge their batteries.
Это вот спереди здание очень интересное.
Anastasia and Dmitry don't really feel out of place here. In theory, Abkhazia isn't in Russia, but in practice, it's as if it were. The ruble is the official currency, and Russian is one of the enclave's 2 languages.
Нет, тут все дублируется на русском языке, поэтому русскоговорящему человеку нет вообще никаких проблем с посещением этих мест. А немного туда. Да.
After the photo shoot in front of the colonnades, off we go to the other must-see for tourists, this zoo. It was built next to a primatology institute, which opened a century ago.
Ничего себе!
Soviet scientists tested vaccines on monkeys. In the 1980s, the monkeys trained here were even sent into space. A statue pays tribute to them.
Ой, там даже что-то написано.
Первый в мире памятник обезьяне.
Так и написано?
Не знаю. Я в интернете
Давай
почитала.
посмотрим.
Желтая лихорадка, сосной тиф, клещевой энцефалит. Очень это здорово. Это не такие помощники?
Угу. То есть все лекарства на них испытывали.
Да.
Today, the center no longer sends monkeys into space, but it still employs scientists studying gerontology. To round off their stay in Abkhazia, Dmitry and Anastasia opted for the unmissable home-cooked meal.
Здравствуйте. Дмитрий.
They're going to discover traditional Abkhazian culture, the majority ethnic group here, and the one that Russian authorities want to promote and favor to the detriment of the Georgians.
Видимо, видели кое-где что. Но вот это село сейчас и накроем, и все сделаем чисто по-абхазски, как это положено. Сейчас мы деликатесы, это вас мы не будем удивлять.
This Abkhaz family lives comfortably thanks to tourism, but mostly thanks to the financial aid they receive from the Russian state. Here, 2/3 of pensions and civil servants' salaries are generously paid by Moscow.
Вообще.
Спасибо.
Очень вкусно.
Но благодаря России, благодаря российскому руководству, что вот мы получаем такую российскую пенсию. Бедно живут, я не могу этого сказать. Средние, может быть, несколько там семей, скажем, со всей Абхазии, там ниже среднего. И то помогают, очень помогают. Во-первых, присылают гуманитарку.
At the same time as Russia buys the support of the Abkhaz population, it discriminates against Georgians. The 45,000 people who live in Abkhazia are concentrated in Gali, a district located along the borderline. They are not entitled to vote. They need passes to move around and can be expropriated at any time. Since September 2022, Their language, Georgian, has not even been taught in schools. Only Abkhazian and Russian are. Redzo, a resident of Gali, agreed to testify.
ჩემი აზრით არის ეთნიკური წმენდა, იმიტომ რომ ხვალ ზეგ, მაზეგ თუ ქართული საუბარი არ იქნა, თუ ქართული სკოლა არ იქნა, თუ საქართველო არ იქნა, მაშინ ჩვენც არ ვიქნებით ეთნიკურად, ხო? ქართული არ იქნება ეთნიკურად. ვინ ვიქნებით ჩვენ? ვინც იქ დარჩება და ამ ბედს შეეგუება, იმან რუსულად უნდა ისაუბროს. და ის უკვე ქართული აღარ იქნება, უბრალოდ გვარი ექნება ქართული და არა სხვა არაფერი. ეს არის ეთნიკური წმენდა.
Redzo is bitter about Russia's tightening grip on the territory. For him, the Russian presence in Abkhazia serves above all to prevent Georgia's emancipation.
რუს არ მოწონს ჩვენი ინტეგრაცია ევროკავშირში. ნაბიჯი რაღაცნაირი უფლებების დაცვა ადამიანთა უფლებები ეს მათთვის მიუღებელია. მათთვის ესეთი რაღაცა არ არსებობს. ისინი ჩემი ღმერთწენით მე საბჭოთა კავშირის დროს დავამთავრე სკოლა და იქ იმ საბჭოთა კავშირიდან ბევრი არაფერი არ შეცვლილა. გადადგმული ნაბიჯია მას მაგრად აღიზიანებს. ის ამას არ დაუშვებს. მის საზღვრებთან არ უნდა ესეთი რაღაცები.
On the Georgian side, the population has been worried since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They fear that Georgia will be the next country on the list. Today, in the capital, Tbilisi, the crowd came to affirm their desire to join the European Union. At their head is Elen Koshtaria, a pro-European politician.
And Georgian people want in the European Union, and we deserve the European Union. Russia can use anything and everything. Russia doesn't need any pretext. It can be Abkhazia, it can be Ossetia, anything. So our goal is not to speculate what they can do. Our goal is to prepare to make sure they cannot do it.
In March 2022, former Soviet Republic Georgia officially applied for membership of the European Union. While the Commission has so far issued an unfavourable opinion, it has granted candidate status to another country, which has also long been coveted by Russia, Ukraine. As in Moldova and Georgia, Russia has attacked Ukraine using the method developed by the KGB in 1991, and which Vladimir Putin, the former spy, applies to the letter. In 2014, to prevent Ukraine from moving closer to the European Union, the FSB, Russia's security services, supported Russian-speaking separatist movements in the Donbass. Two regions proclaimed independence, the Donetsk and the Lugansk People's Republics. War broke out between the separatists and the Kiev army. In February 2022, Vladimir Putin took the next step. He threatened genocide against the Russian-speaking separatist populations of Donbass. He invaded Ukraine. 6 months later, after organizing bogus referendums, he triumphantly announced the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions to Russia.
Сегодня мы подписываем договоры о принятии в состав России Донецкой Народной Республики, Луганской Народной Республики, Запорожской области и Херсонской области. Люди, живущие в Луганске, Донецке, Херсоне и Запорожье, становятся нашими гражданами навсегда.
But in these newly conquered regions, the master of the Kremlin faces fierce resistance. Ukrainians refuse to fall back under the Russian yoke. In May 2022, we went to the front line, to the bombed-out villages. Malinovka, which had a population of 600 before the war, was occupied by the Russian army for 2 weeks. The village has just been liberated by the Ukrainian army. Alexei and Maxim are volunteers for the Territorial Defense Forces. They are responsible for supplying the front line. They also check if the inhabitants who haven't fled need anything. The day before, the Russians shelled the village again. A shell fell on the house next to this couple's.
Улупило, хату, да, улупило, кришу зняло, і воно там осталося у цьому.
Не зайдуть?
Ні.
Ні? А як зайдуть, я їм очі буду різати по кусках.
Та таке.
Якби тільки не вбили мене, я б йому очі першу очередь витягла. Вже така злость на цих кацапів, що жили припіваючи різко, бабах, війна.
Ну вони сюди не прийдуть.
Ні. Ми їх будемо виганяти зовсім.
Так, вони думали, що Україна дурна, Україна слаба. Дуже щасливенько, бережіть себе і нас теж.
Щасливо.
Так, удачі вам, щасливенько.
Ні-ні-ні, саме АЗС.
Maxim and Alexei come from a town that is now in the occupied zone. Their battalion commander, Andriy, was a town councillor there. They all still have family there. For fear of reprisals, they have asked to remain anonymous.
На сегодняшний день 60% военнослужащих – это военнослужащие, семьи которых остались на оккупированной территории. У нас есть факты, когда родных и близких берут заложниками и требуют сдаться или давать информацию противнику о наших войсках. У нас, к сожалению, есть один случай, когда отца нашего военнослужащего в селе Чкалово расстреляли, избили мать, и она на следующий день умерла. Сказка моя, я одевай свою.
To get to the front line, we have to pass through the village of Potolka. For the past 10 days, it has been constantly shelled by Russian artillery.
Здесь начинается больше всего обстрелов. Данная территория – это центр села. Сейчас я буду ехать быстро, потому что здесь опасно ездить, в любой момент могут прилететь прилеты. Они хотят как можно больше нанести урон именно гражданскому населению, чтобы гражданское население выехало и не вернулось на эти населенные пункты.
For Andriy, the objective is more political than military.
Если в Украине не останется людей, значит Украина будет слаба, не сможет восстановить свою экономику. Это основная их цель. Они боятся успешной, независимой Украины, которая войдет в Европу.
They are afraid of rich, strong.
We arrive at Sector 0 on the front line, in one of the outposts commanded by Andriy. 6 volunteers live here permanently. Their mission? To guard the perimeter and prevent a Russian breakthrough.
Внимание всем! Еще 2 вражеских самолета, как приняли прием, с Мелитополя. Идут на север.
Here, artillery duels are almost constant. In the 36 hours we've been at this outpost, we've counted over 500 explosions.
Ай-яй-яй, вот это поле, понял? Опять поле, ебать, я не могу. Поле, да, вот это что сразу получается за селом. Здесь мирное небо.
Before the war, these men were farmers in the area. Their families left for the safety of the free zones. They testify without fear, openly.
Ось в одному домі живемо, виросли в місті. Ось виросли в місті. Це джентльмен. Покажіть, пожалуйста, це джентльмен.
Сплотили весь народ. Они хотели нас расколоть, а получилось наоборот. То, что они всю страну всю нашу нацию, украинскую нацию, они сплотили, и на данный момент мы все как один единственный организм.
Their life in the middle of the woods, in trenches and makeshift shelters, is punctuated by the echo of bombardments. The fear of being spotted by drones is constant.
You show me inside?
If their position is spotted, this shelter is their only chance of survival.
А давай свет мені, да. Дай. От самих, да, от самих мін буде працювати, от градів, наприклад, якщо вони сюди підуть. Це укріплення. Збитий, брустери збитий, коротше, скобами, зверху клейонка від дождя, засипана землею, і ще облагородимо, або зеленку кинемо, або масеть кинемо. Що-то будемо робити таке, щоб безпілотники нас не замічали.
Despite the bombardments, Ukrainian farmers continue to work their fields as if nothing had happened.
Вийшов посмотрети. А, от подивіться, трактор ось в полі ось зараз працює. Ну, а що робити?
Идут град и воюют, и вас делают землю под обстрелами на заминированных полях. Это описать адекватному человеческому психике невозможно, но это нужно делать. Нужно кормить страну, выращивать хлеб и уничтожать.
Та ну все, навіть, да, до того, і коровку кормити треба чимось, і свинью, і курочку, і все остальне. У нас тут поля, ви ж розумієте, що ми тут іменно живемо полями. Тупо землею ми живемо, розумієте?
Farmers are indeed essential to the war effort. It's 6 a.m. on the outskirts of the town of Zaporizhia, 40 kilometers from the front line. Oleg, 53, is about to catch the shuttle bus to work. He's been a farmhand for 16 years, but the war has turned his life upside down.
Там только по ихних карточках. Ну, то есть у меня есть карточка вововская. Вот это некуда только в день действительно отпускается.
Russian strikes on oil refineries have led to a shortage and a surge in pricing, over 30% in less than a week.
Бензин хотят заработать по 50 рублей.
On the way, the vehicle slaloms between anti-tank blocks. They have been placed there to slow down the Russian tanks. After half an hour's drive, Oleg arrives at his place of work, one of the largest grain farms in the region, spreading over 9,000 hectares. Alexander, the farm manager, has about 40 farm workers under his command. Since the invasion, he starts his mornings by making sure that his employees, who live close to the front line, are safe and sound.
Ну, рассказывай давай планы тогда наши на сегодня по обработке.
Да. Ну что, сегодня планы будем продолжать на сегодня.
Тихо, не сильно стреляли. Угу. Ну, давай собираемся, как обычно, тогда на работу. Ждем, да, сегодня начинаем посевную, так что давай ждем тебя. Давай, да. До встречи. Все по плану, все нормально, так что начинаем сегодня ответственно наш этап, это посевная.
The 5 mechanics of the farm have all been mobilized for tank maintenance. Alexander is short-staffed and the war has delayed the start of planting.
Поэтому хочу всем как бы напомнить, и все, думаю, знают, какое сейчас время. У нас сроки посева. Точно так же, вы же понимаете, успех нашего дела зависит только от нас.
For Oleg, they have to work faster now, especially as there's a curfew between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m.
Раньше до войны на каждом тяжелом тракторе, вот это тяжелый трактор называется, Кейс, Джон, работали по 2 человека. Мы работали сутками, днем и ночью. У нас не было, если надо было сеять, то сеяли сейчас в паре сутками.
Sowing with your headlights on means becoming a target for the Russian Air Force.
Ну, конечно. Ми ж як носили газ, бачили, як збили ракету. Наша ПВО. Звісно, воно опасно. Вони ж не, рашисти ж не знають, куди вони навіть стріляють. Вони тільки кажуть, що по воєнним об'єктам. А луплять же ж по інфраструктурі всіх, і по селам, і по городам.
On the day we shot this, the warehouse of a farm in the same region was destroyed by a Russian missile. According to the Ukrainian government, 70% of Russian strikes target civilian areas. But farming isn't the only problem facing Ukrainian grain growers. They are also having great difficulty exporting their crops.
Ну, Анатолий, пошлите, посмотрим качество, которое у нас хранится зерно, то, что мы убрали. То есть сделать какую-то перекидку, наверное, периодически надо его просматривать. У нас его нету.
Storage and export problems are causing tension on the international market. 26 countries depend on Ukraine and Russia for their grain supplies. In Ukraine too, the effects are beginning to be felt.
Там заработков стороны, то есть это поступление валюты, ну и, соответственно, и продовольственная программа не только нашей страны и, наверное, всего мира, ну и под угрозой в связи с этой войной. Вот это то, что нам сделали так называемые в кавычках наши братья, которые себя когда-то называли.
The risk of food shortages reminds Ukrainians of a traumatic episode in their recent history. Holodomor, the Great Famine. In 1932 and 1933, Stalin had Ukrainian peasants' crops confiscated as punishment for their opposition to land collectivization. The famine, organized by the regime, killed between 3 and 5 million people. This worries the local population, who now see their grains stolen and sent by the truckload to Russia. They are then shipped to countries that are friends to Moscow, such as Syria and Burkina Faso. As part of its conquest strategy, Russia is also depriving Ukraine of the infrastructure it needs to boost its economy. It is seizing ports, iron and coal mines, as well as steelworks. Moscow controls the separatist territories through propaganda and repression. Opponents are locked up in secret prisons. In Donetsk, over 1,000 of them are said to have been held in the Izolatsia prison. Stanislav, a Ukrainian journalist, spent over 2 years there.
Я был арестован 11 мая 2017 года. Это был день так называемой республики ДНР. Есть люди в штатском, которые тут же надели на меня наручники, забрали паспорт у полицейских и отволокли в соседнюю машину, которая стояла тут же рядом с площадью. И затем там уже надели мешок на голову и отвезли в здание так называемого Министерства госбезопасности. Через полчаса меня отвели в соседнюю комнату, где начались пытки электрическим током с целью выбить из меня признание, что я украинский шпион.
Under duress, Stanislav signed a forced confession. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. During his years in prison, Stanislav was instrumentalized by Russian propaganda.
Здравствуйте, это Сладков Плюс. То есть я репортер Сладков.
In 2018, he was interviewed by this former soldier, now a correspondent, for Rossiya 24, a Kremlin-funded television station. Stanislav is forced to present himself to millions of viewers as a Ukrainian spy who has just written a novel about his double life.
Какой процент правды внутри эскизов, внутри автобиографического романа? Вот все то, что связано с шпионской деятельностью.
100%.
То есть вы там писали самую настоящую правду?
Да.
He serves his sentence at Izolatsiya, the former factory where enemies of the people are held.
Вот это здание, вот этот первый объект, это как раз камеры заключенных и подвалы для содержания заключенных, в том числе тот подвал, в котором провел первый месяц я. Соседнее здание – это столовая и подвал для пыток. Вот в целом все это вот современный действительно концентрационный лагерь с использованием заключенных в качестве фактически рабочей такой рабской силы, да, и которые выполняют абсолютно все, что им скажут на этой территории.
Izolatsiya was run by Lieutenant Palich, whom the prisoners nicknamed Hades, the Greek god of the underworld. He subjected them to physical, sexual, and psychological torture.
У Палыча была отдельная система влияния на тех, кто попадал туда в виде супружеской пары или просто даже пары. Да? Я, например, сидел с человеком в 4-й камере, чья девушка находилась рядом, в соседней, в 3-й. Палыч специально посадил в нашу камеру для того, чтобы он понимал, что рядом сидит его любимая женщина, да, и с которой он может сделать все, что угодно.
After 28 months in captivity, Stanislav was finally released as part of a prisoner exchange. At least 7 other prisons of the same type are still active in the Donbass. These detention centers have become a gloomy symbol of what Ukraine could become under Russian domination. All the more reason to strengthen the tenacity of the Ukrainian people, who have been fighting their bellicose neighbor since 2014.